Dr. Wolfe told that he had to have work. He had no money. So the old gentleman called his foreman to take this boy out to your house and keep him till Monday morning, which he did. And when they returned Monday, they put him to work. He was there 4 years. They paid him $4.50 a week. But he had to pay $3.50 for board. Board and room at Street Hotel. STREETS, Street Hotel. A place where most of the farmers stopped. They provided a large lot for their wagons and had a bar in the main lobby of the hotel. Only place to sit at night. With all, and all the drinking and rough common men around. I often wondered how these boys, he and his brother Wesley, lived and kept out of the penitentiary in such environment. But they fed well, had plenty of meat and vegetables. Said they did not learn to drink there. And at the end of 4 years, Mr. Ware of Baltimore, I think he had been connected with the business works before then, got a contract to go to Columbia, South Carolina to finish the State House, which had been standing since before the Civil War. Also to Raleigh to build a penitentiary. Mr. Wolfe was acquainted with Mr. Wolfe. Called him Billy. Said, Billy, I'm going south. Come and go with me. He only needed to be asked. Being of a roving nature and had heard so much of the rebels and Reconstruction days there was Reconstruction days. What he was eager to go and take a risk and see what it's all about. He went up home to Pennsylvania to say goodbye to his mother. But what a time he had. To me. She cried, screamed. If you go among those awful rebels, they'll murder you. I'll never see you alive again. What do you think? She liked the Southern people. Learned how they had sacrificed and suffered and were still suffering great humiliation. Where's the other part? W. Wolfe, born a Yankee boy, did not know anything about Southern people and had heard them called awful rebels. That called awful rebels that would have to be taken in charge like criminals. He found just such condition at Raleigh. That was known at Pub Dog as Carpet Bag Room, Reconstruction Day, which must have left years later, I went to see the Birth of a Nation play. When I came home, I told Mr. Wolfe it was the most overdrawn imagination I had ever seen or heard. He said, what could be about it? I told of the scene in the State House of South Carolina where the hall was filled with nothing but bullet-headed ignorant figures. And I was sure no people would stand for such in a land where the same figures had been their slaves. He said, well, you don't know what you're talking about. That is not overdrawn. I saw the legislative halls filled in both states, and that is a true picture. I said, surely people did not stand for such humiliation. He said, why, they had to. Just out of a war, their best men were left on the battle in blood on the battlefield. Niggers are free. The first thing they must do was to try to preserve life for those that were left. They had to think of sowing and reaping, making meat and bread. Could not go to war again. This was learned to love and had great sympathy for the people. Felt they were being persecuted by many unscrupulous people, supposedly put in charge by the federal government at Washington. Federal government. But the big job, no doubt. Government Washington had to bear the blame of lots of wrong that happened. Had to bear. Poor people pleaded to him to come back to his home state, what he liked, North Carolina, and the people. He married twice in Raleigh. The first time, Miss Hattie Watson. They were divorced after the first year. Some years later, describe the seven-room house in which you lived when you first married Mr. Wolfe. The house Mr. Wolfe and I lived in when we were first married. He had built it about 2 years before. As I think he was married before, and they built it to live in because they just couldn't find a house in Asheville when they first came there. Houses were scarce. They lived in a couple of rooms until they got this house built. And it was on Woodford Street, a house with 7 rooms. The first house that was built in Asheville was what they called a cement house on the outside. People thought it was a brownstone house. The way he had mixed cement, and it looked like brownstone, all marked off, in line. And for years, Rick had it with off the stone. Well built house, a well preserved house. But there were three rooms on the first floor, above the basement or cellar, as we called it. A front porch that went all the way around the front. 3 rooms downstairs, and a kitchen. 3 rooms upstairs. Besides the hall. You entered the hall. On your right, you went into a room we call the parlor. And from the hall and from the parlor, we entered the dining room. And then the The other room was the bedroom, but they made a living room out of it. The door that went in to this living room. Also, onto the side porch. The porch that extended all the way around from this living room around to the side across the front of the house, around to the dining room window. A very desirable porch, especially for the summertime. High up from the ground, fronting the street. He had 3 bedrooms upstairs. And the back porch from the dining room into the kitchen. We had no waterworks at that day and time. Therefore, we didn't have any bathroom. My room was the front room over the parlor, upstairs. And this Wolfe's room was, of course, a very small hall over the dining room, upstairs. And the children was over the living room.
How about the time that Emma tried to burn the house down, Miss Wolfe?
One morning in September, Miss Wolfe was out of town, and I looked after his business, and the cook didn't come. So I put some dinner on the stove, and I said, Eddie, don't let this, I'll have to go up to his office. You put some coal in the stove. Don't let the fire go too low. And because of having any kindling, they weren't large enough to split kindling. Well, don't let the fire go too low. And I hadn't been gone very long. This was in 1896. 1896. And he was, something over 10 years old. And the other children were all younger. The youngest one was a little above 2 years. Fred was about, just a little over 2 years old. And the cook left. I said, I'd have to go up there, but I put dinner on. I don't know why I put on dinner. I said, I'll go up to his office and I'll come back. See that fire don't go out. Put some more coal in before it gets too low. And soon after I left, she poured some coal in. Decided later on that fire wasn't burning. Got out on the back porch. They had a can of oil out there. She pumped out, they said, a tomato can full of kerosene oil, poured on. But it didn't burn right then. Covered it up, didn't cure it again. After a while, the man that brought eggs says, here's the bucket of eggs. I'll have to go out and watch my view. They're afraid of the streetcar that passed the corner above there, and I'll have to hold the dew. But the other children had been taught to play on the front porch and stay there, not go out. So they were all on the front porch. And she said she heard something roaring. And when she was counting the eggs, she got out to the porch with the bucket. Why, the people were calling out, fire, fire, and the roof was afire. But they got the children and moved all the furniture out before the firemen got there. Place of business, perhaps 4 or 5 blocks from home. And I'd walked up there. It was very hot and dry. We hadn't had any rain for 5 or 6 weeks. And the dust, it had no paved streets at that time. I remember seeing how the dust was on it as I passed the corner below the house. I noticed in the papers that they didn't have rain. They didn't know the town might be burned up if we had a fire. I walked on. It was rather warm that morning, about 10 o'clock. When I got up to Miss Wolfe's office, I went back into the office, and it just seemed that my heart would stop. Something terrible was going to happen. And I walked out front, and father passed. I thought if I get sick or die back there, it, no, it might not find me. This Wolfe was in the monument business, and people didn't go in there as often as they did in the grocery store. So I was a little afraid. And he said, maybe if he passed, he says, I'm going to put, my brother was sick, he's going to put him on the streetcar. He says, maybe you have indigestion. You have some soda. You get some soda. I said, no, I haven't any indigestion. It just seems that my heart's going to stop. Something terrible will happen. And he said, well, I'll be back directly. And I looked across, I thought, but it's too hot, I can't go home. And I walked, there's a young man that says, say, wouldn't you have some tea? I looked, he didn't have it in his hand, he had a knife, like he said, yes. He says, I said, you have any tea? He says, I'll go in the market, or nearby, get some. And he says, I'll come in and wash my hands. He said, I said, just come on back. And I was glad to have him come in. Went back and I told him how I felt. I said, no, I said, I got some heart trouble. Something terrible will happen. Oh, he says, you don't need teaching. He was there washing his hands and lying on a towel. He says, I've got a bottle of rye whiskey down in the store. I'll go get that. You need something to stimulate. Just then, I heard one gong of the fire bell, which was over the city market. And I screamed. I said, oh, my house is afire. Which they had no other use and had outgrown them. But they were delighted to gather around him when he was sitting in the baby carriage around a crouching on the floor with pillows around him. They would read the little stories printed under the picture. And before he was 2 years old, he could read anything. They read to him. He would say, read about that picture. They were proud to see how much interest he showed and too, they felt they were teachers. Often tried to imitate the way their teachers did at school. Tom could talk when he was a year old, and the whole family, since he was our baby, gave lots of attention to it. They all got tired of their old books and stories. Tom wanted them to read. So any little new book of stories they found on a counter, they would buy and bring it home to him. Mr. Wolfe did the same. He took such delight in getting new books for him and would take him on his lap to read the new stories. Laughed at him. He would say, you know, an old fool is the biggest of all. And I was the same, but I tried to be more reserved and I would say, I guess we loved the others just as much, but there were so many all so dear together. We did not have the time to give each much attention. We just got used to them and did not have time to appreciate them. This was a fact. We tried to do too much other work when we should have lived with our children and let others do the work. I'm older and wiser now. A mother should be a mother and train her own children. Someone else, not a mother, to do all the housework and is no means to pay for such labor, then there should be a public fund are not all the children to make citizens of the country? The better training in health and morals, for the better men and women they make to help civilization. What is neglected, and let's go up, invalids or criminals, the greater expense to the country to build institutions to take care of me. Tom began to learn and understand things around him and could read the stories after Mr. Wolfe or the others had read a few times. He had a remarkable memory, but had to learn words later on. He at home, not like the other children and sisters, other brothers and sisters, who all grew up together and played together, had no one his own age to play with. There were two neighbor boys, one a year older, and the other perhaps two, that came in our alley and backyard. We had a side playground with swings and a playhouse where they went to get his brain. We bought Tom all kinds of toys. He had express wagons, fire engines, and ladders, many things the neighbor boys did not have, and they and Tom had lots of fun and excitement, climbing ladders and putting out imaginary fires. Max Israel and Tom often played when too cold to be out in my sewing group. Tied chairs together and played streetcar. One day I stopped by sewing to listen to their plan. Max first said, "Tom, I think I'll be a streetcar conductor when I get to be a man." Then all of a sudden he changed. Said, "No, guess I'll be a plumber like my papa." Tom spoke at once. "I'd rather be a United States general than a plumber." It occurred to me then there was a difference in rank, and Tom had the idea. Tom got the idea of United States general. He had heard his father often talk of the great generals of the Civil War, Lee, Jackson, and Stewart. Mr. Wolfe had great admiration for these Southern leaders. All this took place before we went to St. Louis in the summer of 1904. Tom was and the other playmates, neighbor boy, Charlie Preston, who was perhaps 2 years older. When Tom was 4 years old, 4 years, 1 month old when Grover died, and old enough to know or remember, not old enough to know or remember much about him. That was my second great son. Soon, so deep, because I've been called on to give the out of good mountains has been work. I think now that black of the beard of my ears and the time that now Grover inauguration. We got there the day, we arrived in Washington the day before the inauguration, and stopped on B Street. And out in front on Capitol Hill, the all the suffragettes were forming to make their parade that afternoon. They had a stack of banners. I said, Tom, run across there and get me one of those banners. I think I'll march with them. I believe they're right. And Tom says, oh, Mama, don't you? Just gracious, don't. He jumped up, cried, thought I really meant it. I said, oh, they're right. That's all right. You can go along. You can march on the sidewalk while I go down to the river with all those ladies. But oh, he says, oh, Mama, don't do it. You disgrace. And when he's distressed about anything, he jump up and down, or when he's delighted, he do the same thing. I don't think I really meant to march, but I just thought I'd try and see what he thought about it. But I didn't march, but we did march or go down the sidewalk. That was a kind of a disgraceful parade for some ladies. And some of them were hurt. Teachers didn't have any order. I don't know where the police were that day, but they got inside of the rope that was stretched along the sidewalk. They got inside and gave the ladies room to march. But I was younger then. I don't know. I don't think I got tired. I walked all the way to Capitol Hill to the Treasury Department. That's where they just standing. The winter of 1910, I said, Tom, went to St. Petersburg, Florida, Tampa, and Jacksonville. Came back by Anderson, South Carolina. In February of 1911, we returned home. In the fall of the same year, we went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and spent 2 months. Spent several days in Memphis, Tennessee. In March 1913, Tom and I went to Washington to the inauguration. We'll go with it. Oh, yes, that's what I saw. In fall of 1913, we took another trip to Florida. Tom was always eager to go. Mr. Wolfe would object to dragging him out over the country, taking him out of school. That he should stay at home. He would never get an education. Pulled out of school any time I wanted to go. But Tom, always overjoyed, would jump up and down, so happy. He knew I would not leave him. So I always said, don't worry, Tom will get an education. We spent some time in Jacksonville this winter, some in St. Augustine and Palm Beach. The next winter I left him to board with Mr. and Mrs. Roberts, who constructed the way I had John Brothers, who conducted the North State City School, or boy. He finished this school in June 1960 and entered Chapel Hill September 16. As I've already mentioned, while I was in Hot Springs, Tom attended the school there for 2 months. Tom was 10 years old. After returned back from Hot Springs at Christmas, during the Christmas holiday. And Tom went back to Orange Street School. In fact, in the same class, though he did not have to, he didn't have to study much. The class held him back, so he put in his extra time reading books he had at home, and those he brought from the city library. While at St. Petersburg, I took him over to school, and the teacher was very anxious for him to enter. But we found the books were all different and considerable. Tom asked me, he said, we don't know what might happen. We might not stay here very long, and that's just extra expense buying all those books. They won't have any use for them when they get back home, as they're different from ours. As I have my books with me, suppose I study and you be the teacher. I asked him, I said, will you do that? He said, yes. Well, we had our lessons every morning. He often laughed and said, Mama, don't you know you're getting lessons, a long lesson? So I said, why, you can study those lessons. They're not too long. He did study them. It wasn't too long for him, but he said they were so much longer than the teacher in Nashville gave. We got back home again in the same class. I noticed one day, I said, Tom, don't you bring any books home? He said, don't have to. It'll be a month before they catch up where we studied when we were in St. Petersburg.
Ms. Wolfe, I wish you'd tell us now about the last fateful journey that Tom made across the continent from Seattle, Washington, when you joined the party in Chicago and came on with John Hopkins.
I think on the 14th of July, 1938, Fred called me up from Spartanburg, South Carolina. Said he had a wire from New York that Tom was seriously ill with pneumonia. Seattle, Washington. And that he had sent a rush wire on to find just his condition. I was on the floor for about 3 hours. I don't know, the impression was bad. Tom's going to die. I got the message later on. Fred called up from Spartanburg and said he had a direct message from the doctor, Dr. Ruger, and that the crisis had all pretty fast, and that the temperature was down, and that he thought Tom would, of course, have to stay in the hospital a couple of weeks before he'd be out. Fred said he never forget. That's when he called me the second time. He says, I had the message, and that I said, oh, he's dead. And he said, no, he's better. He said, I'm coming home, and I'll go. I said, well, one of us will go. Came home, and he called up Dr. Ruger, and told him, he says, I'll come out, he says, I can fly. I'll take the plane, go out. And he said, oh, it's just necessary for him to tweak across the country. He says, he'll be here. He'll be all right in 10 days or 2 weeks. He says, he may have a cough. Longer than that, but he'll be all right. It's necessary to be calm. Fred turned to me and said, I don't like that, though, doctor. I don't like what he said to me. I refused what he said. I said, why, he has nothing to do with either one of us coming out there if we want to go. And so Fred didn't go that night, but he went the next couple of days. But we had a message every day from the doctor. Every morning I'd get a wire. I'd instructed him to let me know every morning. I was ready to go myself. But the doctor wired, oh, he's getting along beautifully. And then a lady out there, Mrs. Stevens, would write me. I had airmail letters every day from her. She said that Tom had made her promise to write me so I would be distressed about his condition. And she said, I'm going to take him out some magazines this afternoon and some flowers. And he's getting along beautifully. Well, I told him at the time that day, surely he can't be very sick or they wouldn't allow him to read magazines. And they just kept me defeated in that way. Well, when Fred got there, the very day that Fred arrived, she sent me a letter and she said she thought maybe they'd made a mistake in letting Fred come out. That Tom might think that they were uneasy about it and it might have some bad effect. Tom was very emotional. And she didn't say they hadn't told Tom, but they told him that the morning that Fred got there, that he was coming in. When Fred went out to this sanitarium, a little place about 11 miles out of the city, hospital for nervous people. This doctor happened to be the doctor of Mr. and Mrs. Stevens. They had recommended him taking him out there because Tom, when they spoke about sending him to the hospital, when he first could sing, he said, oh, no, I have to go back to New York. I'm not going to a hospital. But when they took him over to see this doctor of theirs, they suggested that he be taken out to his place because it didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a modern home. And so the doctor said he could do that. He stayed out there every night. And he would just take him out to his place. But of course the doctor had remarked to them that he'd have to go to a hospital when they first took him out there, just he can't be sick in the hotel. Well, when Fred got there that morning, he found him lying on a cot out under the fir trees. He'd been taken out there for a day. He said several days before he got there. Stayed out there a couple of hours. And, but they told Fred Tom that morning that Fred was coming. He said Tom kind of became excited. He said, oh, what in the world, Fred? Stopping his work, coming out here to see me. It's all that's it. But he quieted down, was all right. And when Fred arrived, and Fred told him he thought he had needed to treat himself, but he wanted to come out where he was while he was sick. And tried to make him feel that he wasn't excited about it. He stayed out there for nearly 4 weeks. Then they moved him into Providence Hospital. All the time they said he's improving. The doctor would write me, Dr. Ruby wrote me on the 10th of August. He says, Tom will be out in another 10 days on his way rejoicing. I'm sending him home to you or anywhere he wants to go. In the next 10 days, he'll be out on his way rejoicing. And I just want you to be worried about him. I know at such a distance that he'd naturally be worried. And well, the doctor said they looked him all over, x-rayed and everything. They found nothing new. And they couldn't see but what the outcome he did. On the 12th, and he was normal, seemingly all right, got up in bed and shaved there. The nurse brought him water and all. He told Fred, he said, you can't shave. He said, you take the skin off. And he said, I want to shave myself. He said, the nurse brought in everything, and he shaved himself and made a good job of it. And that day he had company, several couples. Said he stayed out there most of the day. Well, he went out and went back to dinner. Tom came over normal and seemingly. The doctor was then in. Two of the doctors said, well, he'd be stepping out of here most any day now. And joked him about it. He'd be walking out on him. That evening, about 7:30, Fred went back to the hospital and he found the intern out the hall, almost waiting. He said, too much company, too much company. His fever was normal. He was all right this morning. Had too much company. He's now 103 and a normal headache. Fred went in, he said he saw safety slump, all this high fever. He said he told everybody, no more company. Tom got better. They did everything. First, I think they give him half